The snow fell gently on Naval Base Coronado as Christmas Eve morning broke across Southern California. Most families were wrapping last-minute gifts or preparing holiday meals. But inside the base's indoor shooting range, the sound of gunfire echoed through the halls. It was an unusual day for training, but the Navy SEALs never truly took time off. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he set down his rifle. After 20 years in the SEALs, he thought he had seen every type of shooter imaginable. The morning had started as a friendly competition between his team and some visiting Marines. What began as casual bragging about marksmanship skills had quickly escalated into a serious contest. "All right, Marines, let's see what you've got," Morrison called out to the group of 5 soldiers who had been talking big all morning. They were part of an elite reconnaissance unit, and their reputation preceded them. Staff Sergeant Rick Chen, their leader, was known throughout the Corps for his exceptional shooting abilities. The challenge was simple but demanding. Each shooter had to hit 10 consecutive targets at varying distances, starting at 100 yards and extending out to 400 yards. The targets were standard military silhouettes, but the catch was that each shot had to be taken within 30 seconds of the previous one. No time for extended aiming or breathing exercises. It was designed to simulate the pressure of real combat situations. Chen stepped up first, his confidence evident in every movement. He was a stocky man with calloused hands that spoke of countless hours spent handling weapons. His first 3 shots were clean hits, the crack of his rifle followed by the satisfying ping of metal targets being struck. The 4th shot went slightly wide, catching the edge of the target but still within the scoring zone. By his 7th shot, Chen was struggling. The pressure of the time limit was getting to him, and his breathing had become irregular. Shot 8 missed completely, sailing past the target and into the dirt berm behind it. He finished the remaining 2 shots, but his streak was broken. "Not bad, Marines," Morrison said with a grin, "but let me show you how it's done." Morrison had been the team's designated marksman for over a decade. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled, and his focus absolute. He approached the firing line with the confidence that came from thousands of hours of training and dozens of real-world missions. His first 5 shots were textbook perfect, each one striking dead center of the targets. The watching soldiers grew quiet, recognizing the skill they were witnessing. Morrison's 6th shot was equally impressive, but on the 7th, something went wrong. Whether it was a slight breeze that caught the bullet or a momentary lapse in concentration, the shot went high and to the right, missing the target entirely. "Damn," Morrison muttered under his breath. He finished the sequence, but like Chen, his perfect streak was broken. One by one, the other SEALs and Marines took their turns. Petty Officer First Class Tommy Rodriguez, known for his steady hands during bomb disposal work, managed 8 consecutive hits before his 9th shot went wide. Sergeant Mike Williams, a Marine sniper with 2 tours in Afghanistan, got to 6 before the pressure got to him. The competition had been going on for over 2 hours, and everyone had tried at least twice. The best performance so far was Rodriguez's 8 consecutive hits, but nobody had managed to achieve the seemingly impossible 10 perfect shots in a row under the time pressure. "I guess that's it for today," Morrison announced, starting to pack up his gear. "Rodriguez takes the crown with 8. Not bad for a bomb tech." "Wait," came a voice from the back of the range. Everyone turned to see Petty Officer Second Class Sarah Chen emerging from the equipment room where she had been checking inventory. Sarah was Rick Chen's younger sister, though few people knew about their family connection. At 26, she was one of the youngest sailors on the base to earn her current rank, and she served as the base's head armorer. Sarah was petite, standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with short dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her uniform was crisp and properly fitted, but she looked almost childlike, standing among the group of battle-hardened warriors. Most people who met her for the first time assumed she was a clerk or an administrative assistant, not realizing that she was responsible for maintaining and repairing some of the most sophisticated weapon systems in the military. "I couldn't help but overhear your little contest," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Mind if I give it a try?" The reaction was immediate and varied. Some of the men chuckled, not out of malice but from genuine surprise. Others exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Rick Chen's face flushed red with embarrassment and protective anger. "Sarah, you don't need to prove anything to these guys," her brother said quickly. "This isn't really your thing." Morrison held up a hand to quiet the murmurs. He had worked with Sarah for over a year and had tremendous respect for her technical knowledge and professionalism. While he had never seen her shoot competitively, he knew that anyone who worked as closely with weapons as she did probably had some serious skills. "The range is open to all qualified personnel," Morrison said diplomatically. "If Petty Officer Chen wants to give it a shot, that's her call." Sarah nodded her thanks and walked over to the weapons rack. Instead of selecting one of the high-end sniper rifles that the others had been using, she picked up a standard M4 carbine, the same weapon that every sailor and soldier was expected to master in basic training. It was a reliable gun, but hardly the precision instrument that serious marksmen preferred for long-distance shooting. "You sure you want to use that?" Rodriguez asked. "We've got some much better options available." Sarah checked the weapon's action and loaded a fresh magazine with practiced efficiency. Her movements were smooth and automatic, speaking of countless hours of training and familiarity with the weapon system. "This will do fine," she replied simply. She approached the firing line and adjusted her stance. Unlike the aggressive, tactical positions that the special operations soldiers had used, Sarah's posture was more relaxed, almost casual. She brought the rifle to her shoulder and peered through the standard iron sights, eschewing the advanced optical scopes that the others had relied upon. The first target was at 100 yards, well within the effective range of the M4. Sarah took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean and centered, striking the target's bullseye with authority. "Nice shot," Morrison acknowledged, "but that was the easy one." Sarah didn't respond. She was already transitioning to the second target, located at 150 yards. Her movements were fluid and efficient, with no wasted motion or hesitation. The second shot was equally impressive, another center hit that left no doubt about her capabilities. As she progressed through the sequence, the watching soldiers began to take notice. By the fifth shot, all conversation had stopped. By the seventh, everyone was crowding around to get a better view. Sarah seemed oblivious to the attention, her focus entirely on the targets in front of her. The eighth target was positioned at 350 yards, near the maximum effective range for the weapon she was using. At this distance, factors like wind, humidity, and even the Earth's rotation could affect the bullet's trajectory. Most shooters would have switched to a more powerful rifle with a scope, but Sarah continued with her basic M4. She took a moment longer to aim this shot, compensating for the increased difficulty. When she fired, the bullet seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before striking the target dead center. A few of the watching men actually applauded. "2 more to go," Rodriguez whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break her concentration. The ninth target sat at 375 yards, and the 10th at the maximum range of 400 yards. At these distances, the standard M4 was performing well beyond its intended capabilities. The iron sights that Sarah was using were barely adequate for such long-range precision work. She lined up the ninth shot with the same calm deliberation she had shown throughout the sequence. The crack of the rifle was followed by the distinctive sound of metal being struck. Another perfect hit. The range had grown completely silent except for the sound of Sarah's controlled breathing. Every eye was focused on her as she prepared for the final shot of the sequence. Even the range safety officer had stopped his other duties to watch. 400 yards stretched out before them, the target looking impossibly small through iron sights. Sarah adjusted her stance slightly, compensating for a crosswind that had just picked up. She raised the rifle and began her final aiming sequence. The tension in the air was palpable. 10 consecutive hits under time pressure was something that none of these elite warriors had been able to achieve. And here was a petite armorer about to potentially accomplish what they could not. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot rang out across the range, and everyone held their breath as they waited to see the result. The metallic ping that followed Sarah's final shot seemed to echo forever in the stunned silence of the range. At 400 yards, the target had been struck dead center, completing what no one else had been able to achieve that day. 10 consecutive hits under pressure, using basic equipment, by someone most of them had never even seen shoot before. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Rodriguez began a slow clap that quickly spread through the group. Even Rick Chen, despite his earlier embarrassment, couldn't help but smile with pride at his sister's accomplishment. Unbelievable, Morrison breathed, shaking his head in amazement. In 20 years of service, I've never seen shooting like that under these conditions. Sarah lowered her rifle and engaged the safety with practiced ease. Her expression remained calm, almost businesslike, as if what she had just accomplished was routine rather than extraordinary. Good shooting, petty officer, Morrison continued, extending his hand. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Sarah accepted the handshake with a slight smile. My grandfather taught me when I was young. He was a Marine sniper in Vietnam. Always said the fundamentals were more important than fancy equipment. Your grandfather must have been quite a teacher, Chen said, finally approaching his sister. The protective concern in his voice had been replaced by genuine admiration. He was, Sarah replied simply. He always told us that shooting was 90% mental. The physical part is just mechanics. After one's a visitum. As word of Sarah's achievements spread through the base, more personnel began arriving at the range to hear the story firsthand. By evening, the tale had grown in the telling, with some versions claiming she had been blindfolded or using a damaged weapon. Sarah herself remained modest about the accomplishment, deflecting praise and returning to her duties. But Morrison couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. As the base's senior training officer, he was always looking for ways to improve his team's performance. Sarah's shooting demonstration had revealed something important about the difference between technical skill and natural ability. That evening, as Christmas Eve dinner was being served in the base mess hall, Morrison approached Sarah's table. She was sitting alone, reading a technical manual while eating her meal. Mind if I join you? He asked. Sarah looked up and nodded, closing her book. Of course, Lieutenant Commander. Morrison sat down across from her, his own tray untouched. I've been thinking about what happened today at the range. That wasn't just good shooting, Sarah. That was something special. I got lucky, she replied, taking a bite of her turkey dinner. The conditions were good, and I was having a good day. Luck doesn't account for 10 consecutive hits at those ranges with iron sights, Morrison countered. I've seen lucky shots, and that wasn't it. What you did today was the result of serious training and natural ability. Sarah set down her fork and studied Morrison's face. She could tell this conversation was leading somewhere specific. What are you getting at, sir? Morrison leaned forward, lowering his voice. I want to recommend you for advanced marksmanship training. The kind of program that could lead to sniper school or competitive shooting teams. Your skills are being wasted behind an armorer's bench. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of sadness that Morrison hadn't heard before. With respect, sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'm exactly where I want to be. I didn't join the Navy to be a shooter. I joined to serve my country in the best way I could. But you could serve even better as a designated marksman or sniper, Morrison pressed. Think about how many lives you could save with skills like yours. Sarah picked up her fork again and resumed eating, signaling that the conversation was making her uncomfortable. My grandfather taught me to shoot so I could protect myself and others if necessary. He also taught me that taking a life, even in service to your country, changes you forever. I've seen what that change did to him. Morrison began to understand. Sarah's grandfather, like many Vietnam veterans, had returned from the war carrying invisible wounds that never fully healed. The skills that made him an effective sniper had come at a personal cost that Sarah was unwilling to pay. I can respect that, Morrison said quietly. But what if there was another way to use your abilities? Something that didn't involve combat roles? Before Sarah could respond, her brother Rick appeared at their table, his own dinner tray in hand. Mind if I sit down? He asked, though he was already taking a seat. I wanted to apologize for earlier. I shouldn't have tried to stop you from shooting. Sarah smiled at her brother. You were just being protective. I understand. Still, it wasn't right. Rick continued. "You've always been the better shot between the two of us. I just didn't want these guys giving you a hard time about it." Morrison looked between the siblings with interest. "You two grew up shooting together?" "Every weekend from the time we were 10 years old," Rick confirmed. "Our grandfather had this old farm in Montana, and he'd take us out to his range every Saturday and Sunday. Sarah always outshot me, even though she's 3 years younger." "It wasn't a competition," Sarah protested gently. "Everything was a competition with you two." Rick laughed. "Remember the time you shot that tin can off the fence post at 200 yards with Dad's old .22? I must have tried 50 times to duplicate that shot and never even came close." As the brothers and sister talked, Morrison began to form an idea. Sarah's resistance to combat roles was understandable and admirable, but there were other ways her skills could be utilized. The Navy was always looking for qualified instructors, and someone with her combination of technical knowledge and shooting ability could be invaluable in training other sailors. "Sarah," Morrison interjected when there was a lull in the conversation, "what would you say to teaching others to shoot? Not for special operations necessarily, but for general qualification and safety training?" Sarah considered this carefully. Teaching was different from direct combat application. It was about passing on knowledge and skills that could help others protect themselves and their teammates. "I might be interested in something like that," she said slowly. "But I'd want to focus on fundamentals and safety, not just marksmanship scores." "That's exactly what we need," Morrison replied enthusiastically. "Too many sailors barely qualify with their weapons because they never receive proper instruction beyond basic training. Someone who could teach them the fundamentals your grandfather taught you could make a real difference." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several other personnel who had heard about the day's shooting demonstration. Word had spread throughout the base, and Sarah found herself the center of attention in a way that made her clearly uncomfortable. "Is it true you shot expert scores with iron sights?" asked Ensign Martinez, a young pilot who looked barely old enough to shave. "I heard it was 10 shots at 500 yards, added Chief Petty Officer Williams, clearly embellishing the story. Sarah looked overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Morrison noticed her discomfort and decided to intervene. "All right, everyone, let's give Petty Officer Chen some space to enjoy her dinner," he announced in his command voice. "There'll be plenty of time to talk about it later." The crowd reluctantly dispersed, leaving Sarah, Rick, and Morrison alone at the table again. "This is exactly what I was worried about," Sarah said quietly. "I don't want to be known as that woman who can outshoot the SEALs. I just want to do my job." "Too late for that," Rick said with a grin. "By tomorrow, this story will be all over the Pacific Fleet." Morrison could see that Sarah was genuinely distressed by the attention her demonstration had generated. He made a mental note to have a talk with his personnel about keeping the story in perspective. "For what it's worth," Morrison said, "what impressed me most wasn't just your accuracy. It was your composure under pressure. A lot of excellent shooters fall apart when people are watching and timing them. My grandfather always said that pressure was just another variable to account for, like wind or distance," Sarah replied. "If you let it get in your head, you've already missed the shot." As Christmas Eve wound down and the mess hall began to empty, Morrison reflected on what he had learned that day. Sarah Chen was clearly a remarkable shooter, but more importantly, she was a person of principle who understood the difference between skill and wisdom. Her grandfather had taught her well, not just about marksmanship, but about the responsibility that came with such abilities. The story of her perfect 10 shots would indeed spread throughout the fleet. But Morrison hoped that the real lesson, about preparation, fundamentals, and grace under pressure, wouldn't be lost in the retelling. 3 months after the Christmas Eve shooting demonstration, Sarah Chen found herself standing in front of a classroom filled with 30 nervous sailors. The advanced marksmanship program that Morrison had proposed had been approved by the base commander, and Sarah had reluctantly agreed to serve as the primary instructor. The classroom was sparse, containing only basic furniture and a whiteboard covered with diagrams of shooting positions and breathing techniques. Large windows looked out onto the base's main training range, where the sound of gunfire provided a constant backdrop to military life. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "I'm Petty Officer Chen, and I'll be your primary instructor for the next 6 weeks. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. This course isn't about making you into snipers or special operators. It's about teaching you to be safe, competent, and confident with your weapons. The sailors in front of her represented a cross-section of the base's personnel. There were young recruits fresh out of basic training, sitting next to seasoned petty officers who had been in the service for over a decade. Some were clearly enthusiastic about the training, while others seemed to view it as just another requirement to check off their list. Seaman apprentice Jennifer Walsh, a 19-year-old from Ohio, raised her hand tentatively. Petty Officer Chen, is it true that you outshot an entire SEAL team on Christmas Eve? Sarah had been expecting this question. Despite Morrison's efforts to keep the story in perspective, it had indeed spread throughout the Pacific Fleet, growing more embellished with each retelling. What happened on Christmas Eve was a friendly competition that got a little out of hand, Sarah replied diplomatically. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to help you become better shooters and safer sailors. Over the following weeks, Sarah's teaching philosophy became clear to her students. Unlike traditional military marksmanship training, which focused heavily on scoring and competition, Sarah emphasized understanding and fundamentals. She spent entire lessons on breathing techniques, proper stance, and the mental aspects of shooting. Your rifle is just a tool, she would tell her classes repeatedly. The real weapon is your mind. If your mind isn't calm and focused, it doesn't matter how expensive or accurate your equipment is. One student who particularly struggled was Petty Officer 3rd Class David Kim, an electronics technician from California. Despite having been in the Navy for 4 years, he had never been able to shoot better than barely qualifying scores. His frustration was evident every time he approached the firing line. After a particularly difficult session where Kim had failed to hit the target more often than he succeeded, Sarah approached him as the other students packed up their equipment. "Rough day?" she asked gently. Kim's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I don't understand it, Petty Officer Chen. I can troubleshoot complex radar systems and fix equipment that other people can't even understand. But I can't hit a target at 50 yards. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." Sarah had seen this type of frustration many times before. Intelligent, capable people who excelled in their technical fields often struggled with shooting because they overthought the process. "Walk me through what you're thinking about when you're aiming," she requested. Kim considered the question carefully. "Well, I'm thinking about my breathing, and my stance, and the wind, and whether I'm holding the rifle correctly, and the trigger squeeze, and—" "Stop," Sarah interrupted with a knowing smile. "You're thinking about everything at once. No wonder you're struggling." She led him over to a quiet corner of the range where they could talk without interruption. "My grandfather used to say that shooting was like playing a musical instrument. When you're learning, you have to think about each finger placement and every note. But when you're performing, you have to trust your training and let your body do what it knows how to do." "But how do I get to that point?" Kim asked. "I've been trying for years." Sarah picked up an unloaded rifle from the weapons rack. "We're going to start over. Forget everything you think you know about shooting. Just focus on one thing at a time." For the next hour, Sarah worked with Kim on the most basic fundamentals. They started with simply holding the rifle correctly, then moved to proper breathing, then trigger control. Each element was practiced separately until it became automatic. "Don't think about hitting the target," Sarah instructed as Kim prepared to take his first live shot of the session. "Just focus on following through with good form. Let the hit take care of itself." Kim took a deep breath, settled into his position, and fired. The shot struck the target near the center. His best hit of the day. "How did that feel?" Sarah asked. "Different," Kim replied, surprised by his success. "I wasn't trying so hard." "Exactly. You were letting your training work instead of fighting it." This breakthrough with Kim represented a larger truth that Sarah was discovering about teaching. Her grandfather's lessons about the mental aspects of shooting applied to much more than just marksmanship. They were really lessons about confidence, focus, and trusting in preparation. Word of Sarah's teaching success began to spread beyond the base. Other military installations requested her curriculum, and she found herself writing training manuals, and creating instructional materials that would be used throughout the Navy. The program's reputation was further enhanced when her first class of students took their qualification tests. The improvement in scores was dramatic, with several students achieving expert ratings for the first time in their careers. More importantly, the number of safety incidents during training dropped to nearly zero. Morrison, who had been watching the program's development with great interest, approached Sarah one afternoon as she was cleaning rifles after a training session. "I've been getting calls from the Pentagon," he announced without preamble. "They want to know about your training methods. There's talk of implementing your program fleet-wide." Sarah looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, her expression unreadable. "I'm not sure how I feel about that." "Why not? This is exactly the kind of impact you could have. Think about how many sailors you could help." Sarah set down her cleaning rod and considered his words. "My grandfather always warned me about the difference between teaching people to protect themselves and teaching them to be killers. Where's the line?" It was a question that Morrison had been grappling with himself. The military's primary mission was to fight and win wars, but Sarah's methods seemed to transcend simple combat training. Her students weren't just becoming better shooters, they were becoming more confident and disciplined overall. "I think the line is in the intention," Morrison replied thoughtfully. "Your grandfather taught you to shoot, so you could protect yourself and others. You're teaching these sailors for the same reason. The fact that it also makes them more effective in combat is secondary." Sarah nodded slowly, but Morrison could see she was still conflicted. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Seaman Walsh, the young sailor who had asked about the Christmas Eve shooting on the first day of class. "Excuse me, Petty Officer Chen," Walsh said. "I wanted to let you know that I just got my test results back. I shot expert for the first time ever." Sarah smiled genuinely. "Congratulations, Walsh. How does it feel?" "Amazing," the young sailor replied. "But more than that, I feel like I actually understand what I'm doing now, instead of just hoping for the best." After Walsh left, Morrison turned back to Sarah. "That's your answer right there. You're not just teaching marksmanship, you're teaching confidence and understanding. Those are qualities that will serve her well, whether she's in combat or not." As the months passed, Sarah's program continued to grow and evolve. She developed specialized courses for different types of personnel, from ship security teams to aviation squadrons. Each course was tailored to the specific needs and challenges of the students, but all were built on the same foundation of fundamentals and mental preparation that her grandfather had taught her. The Christmas Eve shooting demonstration that had started it all became legendary within Navy circles. But Sarah had learned to deflect the attention it brought her. She preferred to focus on the quiet satisfaction of watching her students improve and grow in confidence. On the first anniversary of that fateful Christmas Eve, Morrison organized a small ceremony to recognize the program's success. The same group of SEALs and Marines who had participated in the original competition were invited, along with many of the sailors who had benefited from Sarah's instruction. As the ceremony concluded, Rick Chen approached his sister with a small wrapped package. "What's this?" Sarah asked, accepting the gift. "Something I found when I was cleaning out Grandpa's old footlocker," Rick replied. "Mom thought you should have it." "Mom?" Sarah unwrapped the package to reveal a small, worn notebook filled with her grandfather's handwriting. The pages contained detailed notes about shooting techniques, training exercises, and philosophical observations about the responsibility that came with such skills. On the final page, written in faded ink, was a note that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "The greatest marksman is not the one who never misses, but the one who knows when not to shoot. Teach others not just to hit their targets, but to choose them wisely." As Sarah read these words, she understood that her grandfather's lessons had found their way to a new generation through her teaching. The 10 perfect shots she had fired on Christmas Eve were just the beginning of a legacy that would continue to influence and protect sailors for years to come. The story of that Christmas Eve demonstration would be retold countless times in the years that followed. But for Sarah, the real story was much quieter and more meaningful. It was found in the confidence of a young sailor achieving her first expert score, in the safety record of her training program, and in the knowledge that her grandfather's wisdom lived on through every student she taught. The perfect 10 shots had been impressive, but the perfect lesson was one that would last a lifetime.